London, 1850. The invitation to Lady Harrington's ball arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a footman whose livery cost more than Dorothea Darlington's monthly allowance. She traced the embossed script with her fingertip, the heavy cream card stock a symbol of everything she could no longer afford. Another invitation, Miss Darlington. Mrs. Winters, her lady's maid, the only servant she had managed to retain, asked as she arranged the tea tray. Yes. Lady Harrington persists in including me, though heaven knows why. Dorothea sighed, placing the invitation on the side table of her modestly appointed drawing room. The Darlington townhouse, once the jewel of Belgrave Square, now seemed cavernous with its empty rooms and shrouded furniture. Perhaps because you remain unmarried at 26, and she has 4 nephews to settle, Mrs. Winters said with the frankness earned through 20 years of service. Dorothea smiled wryly. For nephews with expensive habits and empty pockets, seeking an heiress, which I most certainly am not, as all of London knows. 3 years had passed since her father's death and the subsequent revelation of his debts. 3 years of careful economies, of selling family treasures discreetly, of wearing remade gowns and declining most invitations. The whispers had eventually subsided, but the damage to her prospects remained. No longer the diamond of the season with a substantial dowry, Dorothea Darlington had become an object of pity, a genteel spinster living on the edges of society. You still have your mother's pearls, Mrs. Winters suggested, pouring the tea with practiced grace. And I shall keep them until the last, Dorothea replied firmly. Though I doubt even mother's pearls would tempt a suitor once they learn the state of my finances. The Morning Post had brought more than Lady Harrington's invitation. Tucked beneath it was a letter from her solicitor, Mr. Finch, requesting an urgent meeting. The Darlington estate in Sussex, her last significant asset, required repairs she could not afford. Selling seemed inevitable. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Winters returned moments later, her expression curious. "A Mr. Oswald Everett to see you, miss." Dorothea nearly spilled her tea. Oswald Everett? The industrialist. The very same, miss. Shall I show him in? Curiosity overcame propriety. Yes, but remain within earshot, Mrs. Winters. It's most irregular for him to call without introduction. The man who entered her drawing room seemed to bring the vitality of the outside world with him. Tall and broad-shouldered, Oswald Everett cut an imposing figure in his perfectly tailored coat. His coppery hair and beard were neatly trimmed, but there was something untamed about him that no amount of fine tailoring could disguise. Miss Darlington, he bowed, his northern accent noticeable but not overwhelming. I apologize for calling without proper introduction. Mr. Everett, she acknowledged, extending her hand briefly before gesturing to a chair. This is most unexpected. His grey eyes assessed her with unsettling directness. I'll come straight to the point, Miss Darlington. I've recently purchased the textile mill adjoining your estate in Sussex. I see, Dorothea replied carefully. Though I fail to understand why this necessitates a personal call. The river that powers my mill runs through your land, he explained. I wish to purchase the water rights and a small parcel of land to expand operations. Dorothea's heart sank. Of course, this wasn't a social call. I'm afraid those matters are handled by my solicitor, Mr. Finch. I've already spoken with Mr. Finch. Something in his expression softened. He suggested I approach you directly as you're considering selling the estate. The realization that her financial circumstances were being discussed by strangers brought a flush to her cheeks. Mr. Finch has overstepped his bounds. Perhaps, Everett conceded, but my proposal might solve your difficulties without requiring you to sell your family home. Despite her irritation, Dorothea found herself intrigued. What proposal? I'll purchase the water rights and the parcel I need at double their value, plus provide an annual payment for use of the river. In exchange, I ask only for right of first refusal should you ever decide to sell the entire estate. The offer was generous, suspiciously so. Why would you pay above market value, Mr. Everett? He smiled, revealing a small gap between his front teeth that somehow made his otherwise intimidating face more approachable. Because I understand the value of heritage, Miss Darlington, despite what society might assume of men in trade. Your family has held that land for generations. Mine worked it as tenant farmers until my grandfather's time. This revelation startled her. Your family worked our land. Until my grandfather left to work in the mills. My father followed, and I eventually owned them. His pride was evident but not boastful. I've done well enough that I can now ensure others don't lose their birthright as my family once lost the connection to theirs. The irony wasn't lost on Dorothea. A man whose ancestors had worked her family's land might now be its salvation. I'll need to consider your offer carefully, Mr. Everett. Of course. He rose to leave. I'll be in London for a fortnight. Perhaps you might permit me to call again once you've consulted with Mr. Finch. After he departed, Dorothea remained seated, turning over the strange encounter in her mind. Oswald Everett was unlike any man of her acquaintance, direct, unapologetic about his origins, and refreshingly honest about his intentions. He's very handsome, for a man in trade, Mrs. Winters observed, collecting the tea things. Mrs. Winters! Dorothea exclaimed, though she couldn't deny the observation. His appearance is entirely irrelevant to our business dealings. Of course, miss, her maid replied with a knowing look that made Dorothea feel like a schoolgirl caught passing notes. Though it wouldn't hurt to wear your blue silk when he calls again. It brings out your eyes. 2 days later, Dorothea found herself not only wearing the blue silk when Oswald Everett returned but also agreeing to his proposal after thorough consultation with Mr. Finch. The terms were indeed generous, and the arrangement would provide enough income to maintain the Sussex estate and improve her London situation. You've made a sensible decision, Miss Darlington, Everett said as they signed the papers Mr. Finch had prepared. Sensible decisions are all I've made these past 3 years, Mr. Everett, she replied with a hint of melancholy. His eyes lingered on her face. Sometimes the most sensible path allows for moments of impulsivity. Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. Are you advocating impulsivity, sir? How shocking for a businessman. Calculated risks, Miss Darlington. The cornerstone of any successful enterprise. He gathered his hat and gloves. Speaking of which, I understand Lady Harrington's ball is tomorrow evening. Dorothea blinked at the sudden change in subject. It is. I've received an invitation, though I suspect it was sent more out of curiosity than genuine desire for my company. She couldn't help but smile. Lady Harrington collects interesting specimens for her gatherings. I believe she once invited a Prussian prince who could balance a teacup on his nose. And now an upstart northern mill owner. His eyes crinkled with humor. Perhaps I should learn a similar trick to justify my presence. Your success is trick enough for London society, Mr. Everett, she replied. They'll want to observe how a man of trade comports himself among the ton. Then I shall endeavor not to disappoint. He paused at the door. Will you be attending, Miss Darlington? I had not planned to, no. A pity. I'd hoped for at least one friendly face. With that, he bowed and departed, leaving Dorothea to wonder if she had just been issued a challenge. Lady Harrington's ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, illuminating the cream of London society in all their finery. Dorothea stood near the entrance, her mother's pearls at her throat and her emerald silk gown, remodelled for the occasion, swishing softly around her ankles. She had almost changed her mind a dozen times before leaving home. Miss Darlington! What a delightful surprise! Lady Harrington descended upon her, bearing fingers clasping Dorothea's gloved ones. We've missed you at our gatherings. You're kind to say so, Lady Harrington, Dorothea murmured, already scanning the room despite herself. Her hostess followed her gaze knowingly. Looking for someone in particular? Several eligible gentlemen are present tonight. Merely taking in the splendor of your ballroom, Dorothea deflected. Indeed. Lady Harrington's eyes twinkled with mischief. Including my newest guest, Mr. Oswald Everett. Have you been introduced? A self-made man, I understand, with quite remarkable assets. The emphasis on the word made Dorothea blush. "We have a business arrangement regarding my Sussex property, nothing more." "Business? How fascinating." Lady Harrington waved to someone across the room. "Ah, speak of the devil. Mr. Everett. Come meet Miss Darlington." Dorothea turned to correct her hostess. They had already met, but the words died on her lips. Oswald Everett in evening attire was a sight to behold. The severe black and white emphasized his powerful build and confident bearing in a way his daytime clothes had not. "We are already acquainted, Lady Harrington," he said smoothly, bowing to Dorothea. "Miss Darlington has been kind enough to assist me with a business matter." "How modern," Lady Harrington pronounced, clearly delighted by this tidbit. "Miss Darlington, you must tell me everything, but first, I believe Mr. Everett deserves a dance for travelling all the way from the north to join us." Before Dorothea could protest, Lady Harrington had moved away, leaving her alone with Everett as the musicians prepared for the next set. "You came," he said simply. "I found myself unexpectedly free this evening," she replied, fiddling with her fan. His smile suggested he didn't believe her for a moment. "Would you honor me with this dance, Miss Darlington?" Propriety dictated she should refuse. They had no formal introduction beyond their business dealings. Dancing would signal an intimacy that didn't exist. Yet as the opening notes of a waltz filled the air, Dorothea found herself placing her hand in his. "One dance, Mr. Everett." His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her into the swirling mass of dancers. Dorothea had forgotten the simple pleasure of being led confidently around a ballroom, of being held, however properly, by a man who seemed to see her rather than through her. "You dance well for a man of trade," she observed, unable to resist teasing him. "I hired a dancing master when I first made my fortune," he admitted without embarrassment. "Along with tutors in elocution, literature, and deportment. I may have been born common, Miss Darlington, but I saw no reason to remain unpolished." The honesty of this confession touched her. Most men would invent a more romantic history. "I find truth simpler to maintain than fiction." His eyes held hers. "And I've never been ashamed of what I am." They completed the dance in silence, each acutely aware of the eyes following them. As he escorted her back to the edge of the ballroom, Dorothea noticed the curious glances and whispered comments. "I fear I've made you the subject of gossip, Mr. Everett," she murmured. "I doubt it's the first time for either of us," he replied with surprising insight. "Though perhaps for different reasons." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. Dorothea found herself introduced to several of Everett's business associates, all men of similar background who had attained positions of influence through industry rather than inheritance. She was struck by their intelligence and earnestness, so different from the jaded aristocrats of her usual circle. When Everett escorted her to her carriage at the evening's end, he hesitated before closing the door. "I leave for Sussex tomorrow to survey the mill expansion. I would be honored if you would permit me to call on you when I return to London." "To discuss business?" she asked, suddenly breathless. "No, Miss Darlington." His voice deepened. "To discuss anything but business." The impropriety of it should have shocked her, but instead, Dorothea felt a long-dormant spark of excitement. "That would be most irregular, Mr. Everett." "Calculated risk," he reminded her with a smile before stepping back to allow her carriage to depart. The next morning brought the consequences of her impulsivity. Tucked among the usual correspondence was a note from her cousin, Lady Amelia Crawford, containing a clipping from the society pages. Miss D. once the diamond of the season before her father's unfortunate financial missteps, was observed in animated conversation with the northern industrialist Mr. O.E. at Lady Harrington's ball. One wonders if Miss D.'s reduced circumstances have led her to consider alliances previously deemed beneath her station. The implication was clear and cruel. Dorothea crumpled the clipping in her fist, anger warring with humiliation. She had expected gossip but not such public speculation about her financial situation or her relationship with Everett. A second note arrived before noon, this one from Lady Harrington herself, surprisingly supportive. "My dear Miss Darlington, pay no heed to malicious gossip. Mr. Everett may be new to our circle, but his character appears exemplary, his fortune substantial, and his interest in you obvious to all with eyes. In these modern times, birth counts for less than it once did. Consider carefully before allowing pride to reject what might bring happiness. Pride. Was that what held her back? Or was it fear, fear of more gossip, more loss of status, more uncertainty? Oswald Everett represented everything her upbringing had taught her to dismiss, yet she couldn't dismiss the memory of his hand at her waist, his direct gaze, his unashamed honesty. The weeks that followed tested Dorothea's resolve. More clippings arrived from concerned friends, each more pointed than the last. Invitations dwindled, though whether from her association with Everett or her continued financial constraints, she couldn't be certain. When Oswald finally returned to London and called upon her as promised, Dorothea received him with mixed emotions. "I've become a liability to your reputation," she said without preamble once they were seated in her drawing room. He seemed genuinely puzzled. "My reputation? Miss Darlington, it is I who have damaged yours by association. You misunderstand." She handed him the collected clippings. "Society mocks me not because you are beneath me, but because they believe I pursue you for your fortune." Oswald scanned the clippings, his expression darkening. "This is unconscionable." "It is the world we inhabit," she replied wearily, "where a woman's worth is measured by her dowry, and a man's by his bloodline. Not my world." He set aside the papers. "In my world, worth is determined by character, by integrity, by the ability to build something lasting. A world I know nothing about. You could learn." He leaned forward, intensity in every line of his face. "Miss Darlington, Dorothea, I came today not merely to call but to make my intentions clear. These past weeks apart have confirmed what I suspected from our first meeting. I admire you greatly and wish to court you properly, with marriage as my aim." She stared at him, speechless. "Mr. Everett, Oswald, please." "Oswald," she amended, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. "You cannot be serious. The scandal would be immense." "I'm quite accustomed to scandal," he replied with a wry smile. "When I purchased my first mill, the local gentry refused to acknowledge me. When I expanded to London, I was called an opportunist. Yet here I stand, respected if not fully accepted." "It's different for a woman," Dorothea insisted. "My reputation is all I have left." He studied her face. "Is that truly all? Not your intelligence, your grace under pressure, your determination to preserve your family legacy against impossible odds? Those are the qualities that drew me to you, Dorothea, not your family name or social position." His words touched something deep within her, the part that had always chafed against society's narrow definitions of a woman's value. Still, practicality reasserted itself. "Even if I were willing to brave scandal, our worlds are too different. I know nothing of business or industry. And I know little of art or literature or the intricacies of aristocratic society," he countered. "We could learn from each other. Build something new together." The possibility he offered was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I need time to consider." "Of course." He rose to leave. "But know this, I am not deterred by difficulty or disapproval. When I determine something is worth having, I pursue it with all my resources." After he left, Dorothea sat motionless, his words echoing in her mind. No man had ever spoken to her with such direct admiration, such clear intent. Previous suitors had flattered her beauty or lineage, never her character or resilience. The following days brought unexpected clarity. A visit from her cousin Amelia, the same who had sent the first cutting, revealed the depths of society's hypocrisy. "You cannot seriously be considering that man's attentions," Amelia said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Think of your family name." "My family name did not prevent my father from gambling away our fortune," Dorothea replied calmly. "Nor has it provided comfort or security these past 3 years." "There are ways to restore your position," Amelia insisted. "Lord Pembroke has expressed interest." "Lord Pembroke is 63 with a penchant for young wives who die in childbirth," Dorothea interrupted. His interest stems solely from my remaining connection to the Duke of Westmoreland. At least he is one of us, Amelia sniffed. This Everett person, with his factories and common accent, has shown me more genuine respect in our brief acquaintance than any gentleman of our circle, Dorothea finished. And his commoner enterprises employ hundreds, providing decent wages and housing. Amelia's eyes widened. You sound like a radical. Next you'll be advocating women's suffrage. The accusation struck Dorothea as absurd yet somehow liberating. Perhaps she was becoming radical, at least by the standards of her narrow social world. I think you should leave, Amelia, she said quietly. And please convey to our family that I will make my own decisions regarding my future. After her cousin's departure, Dorothea penned a note to Oswald. I would be pleased to continue our discussions. Perhaps you might show me your London offices tomorrow? I find I wish to understand your world better before giving any answer to your proposal. His response arrived within the hour, expressing delight at her interest and arranging transportation for the following day. The Everett and Sons manufacturing offices occupied a modern building near the Thames. As Dorothea descended from the carriage Oswald had sent, she felt conspicuously out of place in her fashionable walking dress and bonnet. Workers hurried past, casting curious glances her way. Oswald greeted her in the entrance hall, his face lighting with genuine pleasure at her arrival. You came. I confess I half expected you to change your mind. I nearly did, she admitted as he led her inside. This is all quite foreign to me. As all Max would be to me, he replied good-naturedly. Though I suspect your world has stricter rules of admission. The tour revealed a side of London Dorothea had never encountered, the ordered chaos of commerce, the precise machinery of industry, the buzzing energy of purposeful activity. Oswald moved through it all with easy authority, greeting workers by name, discussing technical problems, reviewing accounts. You seem to know every aspect of the business, she observed as they paused in his office, a surprisingly elegant room with large windows overlooking the river. I started on the factory floor at 14, he explained. I believe in understanding every position before attempting to manage others in it. A novel concept for aristocratic management, she remarked. Most estate owners never touch the soil they possess. Perhaps that's why so many estates fail. He offered her a seat near the window. What do you think of our operation so far? I think it's remarkable, she answered honestly. Though I understand little of the technical aspects, the purpose and order are evident. You've built something meaningful. His expression softened. That means a great deal coming from you. Why should my opinion matter? I know nothing of business. Because you see beyond surface judgments, he said simply. You're examining the substance rather than the packaging. The afternoon continued with visits to the company's model housing for workers and a small school they had established. By day's end, Dorothea's perception had shifted irrevocably. Oswald Everett wasn't merely a successful businessman, he was a visionary who understood that prosperity should be shared, that industry could improve lives rather than exploit them. As they rode back toward Belgravia in his carriage, a comfortable silence fell between them. Dorothea realized with surprise that she felt more herself in his company than she had with anyone since her father's death. You've given me much to consider, she said finally. Have I improved my case? He asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. You have, she acknowledged. Though there remains the matter of society's reaction. Would it help to meet someone who has navigated similar waters, he suggested. My sister Catherine married Lord Edwin Blackwell last year. Their match caused quite the stir initially, but they found their place. The idea of speaking with someone who understood the challenges ahead appealed to Dorothea. I would like that very much. 2 days later, she found herself taking tea in the elegant drawing room of Lady Catherine Blackwell's Mayfair residence. Catherine proved to be a forthright woman with her brother's copper hair and direct manner. Oswald tells me you're concerned about society's reaction to a possible match between you, Catherine said once pleasantries had been exchanged. I believe that's a reasonable concern, Dorothea replied carefully. Absolutely reasonable, Catherine agreed with surprising vehemence. The gossip will be vicious, the snub's painful, and certain doors will close to you forever. Dorothea blinked, taken aback by this blunt assessment. Your brother painted a somewhat rosier picture. Men often do, Catherine said with affectionate exasperation. They focus on what can be gained rather than what must be endured. But you should know the full truth before making your decision. I appreciate your honesty. Catherine leaned forward. Having acknowledged the difficulties, let me tell you what I've gained. A husband who values my mind as well as my person. The freedom to involve myself in meaningful work rather than endless social obligations. And a family who judges character above pedigree. You don't regret your choice? Not for a moment, Catherine replied without hesitation. Though I won't pretend there haven't been difficult days. The question is whether what you gain outweighs what you lose. As Dorothea departed, Catherine's parting word stayed with her. Society's approval is a comfortable prison, Miss Darlington. Comfortable, but a prison nonetheless. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of meetings, conversations, and self-examination. Oswald courted her with respectful persistence, taking her to lectures, exhibitions, and concerts, public enough to declare his intentions but removed from the most judgmental social circles. With each encounter, Dorothea found herself more drawn to his combination of strength and gentleness, his intellectual curiosity, and his unwavering integrity. He listened to her opinions as if they mattered, encouraged her interests, and never once suggested she should be other than who she was. The breaking point came unexpectedly. While attending a botanical exhibition at Kew Gardens, they encountered Lord and Lady Harwick, distant connections of Dorothea's family. Lady Harwick deliberately turned away, tugging her husband's arm to avoid acknowledging them. I apologize for that rudeness, Dorothea said once they had passed, mortification heating her cheeks. Oswald seemed more amused than offended. I believe Lady Harwick fears social contamination might be transmitted through eye contact. His humor in the face of such blatant snubbing surprised a laugh from Dorothea. You're remarkably sanguine about being treated so poorly. Their opinion of me changes nothing about who I am, he replied. Just as their treatment of you reflects only their own limitations, not your worth. In that moment, something crystallized for Dorothea. The society she had been so desperate to remain part of had offered her nothing but conditional acceptance based on wealth and status she no longer possessed. It would judge her harshly for choosing Oswald regardless of his character or what he might bring to her life. I think I've been afraid of the wrong things, she said slowly as they continued their walk. Not of losing society's approval, but of embracing a life I haven't been trained for. Oswald stopped, turning to face her. What life would that be? One where I'm valued for myself rather than my connections. Where purpose matters more than propriety. She met his gaze steadily. The life you've offered me. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Dorothea, are you saying that I would be honored to accept your proposal? She finished, her heart racing but her voice firm. If it still stands. His smile transformed his face. It stands more firmly than ever. He glanced around the public garden. Though this is hardly the romantic setting I had planned for this moment. I find I prefer honesty to romance, she replied, returning his smile. Though I wouldn't object to a proper proposal when circumstances permit. Those circumstances arrived the following evening, when Oswald called at the Darlington townhouse with a small velvet box and permission formally requested from her nearest male relation, a bemused uncle who had played little role in her life but was legally her guardian until marriage. As he knelt before her in the drawing room where they had first met to discuss water rights and land parcels, Dorothea felt a sense of rightness that transcended convention. Dorothea Darlington, he said, his northern accent more pronounced in his emotion, you have shown me that true nobility lies in character, not birth. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? The ring he offered was not the massive diamond might have expected from a wealthy industrialist, but a perfect sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds, elegant and understated. It reminded me of your eyes, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. And of your strength, sapphires are second only to diamonds in hardness. Yes, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. Yes, I will marry you, Oswald Everett, and gladly face whatever comes with you beside me. Their wedding 3 months later was small by aristocratic standards but warm and joyful. Some of Dorothea's family refused to attend, but those who mattered most, her favorite aunt, 2 loyal cousins, and several childhood friends, stood witness as she pledged herself to a man society deemed unsuitable. The society papers noted the event with predictable disdain. Miss Dorothea Darlington, once counted among the highest circles despite reduced circumstances, yesterday allied herself with trade in the form of Mr. Oswald Everett, the northern mill owner whose rapid rise has caused much comment in financial circles. One must suppose that comfort has triumphed over connections in this unexpected match. Dorothea read the notice on their honeymoon in Paris, laughing as she showed it to her husband. "They've underestimated you again," Oswald observed, pulling her closer in their hotel suite. "Assuming you married for security rather than love." "Let them assume what they will," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "We know the truth." And the truth, as Dorothea discovered in the years that followed, was that defying society's narrow expectations had brought her a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. Her husband's wealth provided comfort, certainly, but it was his unwavering support that allowed her to discover her own talents for organization and philanthropy. Together, they established schools for workers' children, improved housing conditions, and even, in time, earned grudging respect from some of the very social circles that had once shunned them. Their home became a gathering place for artists, inventors, reformers, and, yes, even a few forward-thinking aristocrats who recognized that the future belonged not to those with the oldest names but to those with the boldest vision. When their first child was born a year after their marriage, a daughter with her father's copper hair and her mother's blue eyes, they named her Victoria, for the queen who presided over an age of transformation. It seemed fitting for a child born of a union that bridged worlds once thought irreconcilable. "She'll have choices we never had," Dorothea murmured as they stood over her cradle. "And the courage to make them, with you as her mother," Oswald replied, his arm steady around his wife's waist. In that moment, as in countless others throughout their marriage, Dorothea knew with absolute certainty that in choosing love over convention, purpose over position, and future over past, she had not fallen from grace but risen to a higher understanding of what truly mattered in a life well lived.